Hello everyone, and you're now watching CGTN. We're bringing you more updates on US President Donald Trump's visit to China and also other news updates around the world as well. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing.
I'm Dong Shi. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue our coverage today.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has held a small group meeting with US President Donald Trump in Beijing. President Trump is on a 3-day state visit to China at the invitation of President Xi. Trump's trip is set to conclude later today.
That's right, Donnie, and we're watching that very closely right here on CGTN. The two presidents have also visited the Temple of Heaven right here in the Chinese capital. President Xi greeted President Trump outside the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvest. The two heads of state posed for a photo in front of the hall and toured the historic site together. During the tour, President Xi said he and President Trump visited the Forbidden City along Beijing's Central Axis in 2017. The Temple of Heaven was built in the same era as the Forbidden City. Its design embodies the ancient Chinese concept of round heaven and square earth, reflecting the Chinese worldview and philosophy of life. President Xi said ancient Chinese rulers held ceremonies at the Temple of Heaven to pray for peace, prosperity, and favorable weather. The ritual demonstrated the long-held Chinese political philosophy that the people are the foundation of the state, and only when the foundation is solid can the state enjoy peace. President Xi said the Communist Party of China has inherited and developed this people-centered philosophy and has always upheld the fundamental purpose to serve the people wholeheartedly, winning their support and allegiance. President Trump said his visit to the Forbidden City in 2017 remains vivid. He said the Temple of Heaven, standing tall and magnificent for more than 600 years, showcases China's classical architecture and profound culture. He said China and the U.S. are great nations, and so are their people. They should deepen mutual understanding and enhance friendship.
And Chinese President Xi Jinping has held a state banquet at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing to welcome U.S. President Donald Trump. And the two leaders delivered remarks at the event.
In his remarks, President Xi Jinping said China is entering the first year of its 15th five-year plan period. He said more than 1.4 billion Chinese people are advancing Chinese modernization through high-quality development, drawing strength from China's more than 5,000 years of civilization. Xi also noted that this year marks the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence. He said the American people are promoting patriotism, innovation, and pioneering spirit as the country moves toward a new stage of development. Xi said the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the goal of making America great again can advance side by side, benefit one another, and contribute to the world. Referring to the ping-pong diplomacy 55 years ago, Xi said it opened the door to China-U.S. exchanges after more than 2 decades of isolation. He added that stories of openness and cooperation have continued to shape ties between the two countries. Xi said he and President Trump have maintained communication through meetings and phone calls, helping keep bilateral relations generally stable. He said both sides agree that China-U.S. relations are the world's most important bilateral relationship and should be improved, not damaged. President Xi said the two countries benefit from cooperation and both lose from confrontation, adding that they should be partners rather than rivals. He said the two sides agree to build a constructive relationship of strategic stability, promoting steady, healthy, and sustainable development of bilateral ties. Xi also said mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation are key to the stable development of China-U.S. relations. He said China-U.S. ties concern the well-being of more than 1.7 billion people in the two countries, and also the interests of more than 8 billion people around the world. Trump thanked Xi for the warm hospitality during the visit. He described the trip as important and said the two sides had held positive and constructive discussions. President Trump also said the American and Chinese peoples appreciate and respect each other, adding that stronger cooperation between the two countries can help create a better future for the world.
And top U.S. executives and entrepreneurs from leading tech, finance, aerospace, and agriculture industries have joined President Trump on his visit to China. Compared to Trump's first visit in 2017, this year's business delegation has more representation from high-tech and financial sectors. The CEOs cited China's market vitality and innovation momentum and are optimistic about its economic growth.
I think this is one of the most incredible economies in the world. Incredible innovation. This is also one of the major nations advancing AI. I think you're doing great. China's doing great.
Yeah, I think it's very strong. Mm-hmm. I think that people are very excited about AI and new technology here and embrace it very readily. And I couldn't be more excited about it.
The Chinese economy has a very good outlook. I think it's a very dynamic economy, and I think has a very good outlook at it.
China's laid out a very straightforward, ambitious 5-year plan. It's 15th 5-year plan. And, my expectation is China will continue to make more progress, more economic growth as they execute this next 5-year plan.
The Chinese economy seems to be strong and the outlook is good. It's nice to see the two countries together collaborating, so it's been good to be here. Dialogue is always a good start and seek common understanding, and I think that's what we've seen today with President Xi and President Trump. We've seen good collaboration, and that drives understanding, and when we do that, we can find areas that we can work together and grow both economies.
And I'm look with a lot of optimism. I think the opportunity, especially with technology. I think, China has a vibrant economy and will continue to play a role in the supply chain.
From the city's perspective, we serve a lot of the Chinese companies, and what we see more than anything is just the innovation of them. And there's an incredible vibrancy there, so it's hard not to feel very positive about the potential for continued success and prosperity here. I think there's, I wouldn't be betting against the Chinese entrepreneur. They're very successful, and we are looking forward to continuing to help support the deepening of the capital markets here in China so that we can create more of the investment and continue the opportunity domestically.
The international community has been paying close attention to the meeting, of course, between the Chinese and U.S. heads of state. And local leaders, scholars and officials shared their thoughts on the talks and their hopes for a more constructive China-U.S. relationship.
President Xi has brought with the idea of a big ship. So we need to cooperate, right? We need to be able to cooperate together to work towards harmony and peace and a beautiful future for the world.
An amazingly powerful statement by President Xi to President Trump. It actually shows a little bit of the different approach between the two presidents, because President Xi was talking about something that's bigger than just their personal relationship. He was saying our nations should be partners rather than rivals.
The meeting of today, I hope it will be historic. Historic because these two countries have a lot to bring to humanity. So discussions on supply chains and trade, discussions on the technology transition, discussions about world peace and security. So there is high expectations.
And for more updates on U.S. President Donald Trump's agenda this morning in Beijing, here's CGTN reporter Yang Chengxi.
Yesterday's events were marked by a sense of cordial friendliness, as seen from the state banquet held for President Donald Trump, senior officials of the U.S. administration, and of course, business representatives. Now, President Xi said that the Chinese people and the American people are great peoples of the world, and that the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and making America great again can advance in parallel and benefit the world. And we've seen President Donald Trump saying that the China-U.S. relationship is the single most important bilateral bilateral relationship in the world and that both countries should strengthen cooperation. Today's agenda involves a bilateral tea and lunch before the U.S. delegation depart from Beijing. Now, the importance of this Heads of State summit is not lost on many. For example, we've seen the spokesperson for the International Monetary Fund, Julie Kozak, saying yesterday that the IMF welcomes such constructive dialogue and that it is good for the world economy. Now, as the summit and as the state visit wraps up and approaching its final leg, all eyes are fixated on the possible outcomes and results. We have yet to see any official releases from both sides. However, some companies have already released their own discussion results. For example, we've seen yesterday the Bank of China chairman Ge Haijiao held a meeting with the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Both sides signed a memorandum of cooperation between the bank's New York branch and the council. Now note that soybean trade has been one of the focal points in the economic and trade relationship between the two countries in recent years. Now both sides said that the successful meetings of the two heads of states have injected new momentum in both countries' economic and trade cooperations. Now since for the past 2 days, senior officials from the U.S. delegations have been talking to some American-based media, and they discussed possible breakthroughs, outcomes in areas such as AI chip, Boeing jet purchases, and beef and other agricultural product trade.
Meanwhile, China's Ministry of Commerce has confirmed the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, who serves as Beijing's lead official for China-U.S. economic and trade affairs, held consultations on Wednesday in the Republic of Korea with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. A spokesperson said the two sides, guided by the important consensus reached by the two heads of state and following the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation, had a candid, in-depth and constructive exchanges to address each other's economic and trade concerns and to expand practical cooperation.
Moving forward, China is willing to work with the United States based on the principles of equality, mutual respect and mutual benefit to expand the scope of cooperation, narrow the list of problems, and promote the healthy, stable, and sustainable development of China-U.S. economic and trade relations.
And agriculture is one of the sectors crucial to bolstering China-U.S. trade and cooperation. Among the U.S. exports finding a huge market in China is American ginseng, largely grown in the state of Wisconsin. Our reporter Ye Qingzhuo interviewed Robert Dunsky, president of the Ginseng Board of Wisconsin, on the opportunities.
In Shanghai, shoppers stop to taste, ask questions, and learn about American ginseng, a crop grown thousands of kilometers away, yet popular with consumers here.
An 83-year-old, 20%.
For U.S. growers, China has become a destination they return to again and again, visiting 2 or 3 times a year to meet partners and consumers face to face.
China is our market. 65% of the ginseng that we raise in Wisconsin comes directly into China.
As a ginseng farmer with more than 40 years of experience, he noted that 98% of U.S. ginseng is produced in Wisconsin, where the industry traces back more than 125 years.
Well, Wisconsin ginseng has been imported here to China for centuries. Originally, it was a wild ginseng, but about a century and a half ago, we cultivated the ginseng in Wisconsin. It's our climate, our soils that make us really unique.
During this visit to Shanghai, the delegation explored new opportunities with local businesses. Industry representatives say success in today's agricultural trade depends not only on exports, but on understanding changing consumer behavior.
Yesterday, we visited a local bakery who's thinking about incorporating ginseng into some of their baked goods, which will be more appetizing for younger consumers because people don't want to cook anymore or use ginseng in the traditional ways. We're trying to be more modern with the applications of ginseng.
Ginseng is more maybe than just your TCM, and now that it can be used every day in your cooking.
Agricultural trade remains one of the most stable areas of economic exchange between China and the United States. Industry groups say cooperation with Chinese partners has continued through different market cycles, supported by long-standing commercial relationships.
We've even throughout many different changes in administration for the United States, we still come here. We have great relationships with our distributors. Our partnerships are very strong here, and we're very welcomed when we come here.
Farmers acknowledge global trade conditions remain complex, including tariff pressures and market uncertainties. Yet many remain cautiously optimistic about continued cooperation.
It's stress. I guess I'd call it stress. And each country is looking out for the best of their own country, but they're working through it. And there's been some negotiations, and there's been some good trade talk here lately. Each country needs each other in certain ways.
For American agricultural groups, Shanghai has become an important gateway to reconnect with Chinese buyers. Trade fairs, industry events, and exhibitions in the city now serve as key platforms for rebuilding business links and expanding cooperation. His previous visit here was for the China International Import Expo.
So that's a very good platform. We had been at the very first one in 2018, and our pavilion had a big display. We're appreciative of that. We are participating this year in the CIE.
At last year's CIE, the U.S. Food and Agriculture Pavilion featured 19 American exhibitors. Small and medium-sized American exhibitors pocketed nearly $12 million in purchase orders, a 5% increase year-on-year. From traditional roots to modern innovation, American ginseng reflects how agricultural exchange continues to connect producers and consumers across the Pacific, one visit at a time. 叶清卓, SMG International for CGTN.
And our small city in central China is betting big on one tiny ball, pickleball. A sport born in the United States is now booming in Hebei, Henan province. CGTN's Li Shuang tells us how this city is paddling ahead by hosting national tournaments and exporting equipment overseas, turning the sport into a new engine for economic growth and city branding.
From sports legends
Andre Agassi has come out on fire
to Hollywood stars, a game that was created using leftover equipment from other sports has taken the world by storm.
If you're not familiar with pickleball, think of it as a mix of tennis and table tennis, played on a badminton-sized court with a plastic ball and carbon fiber paddles. The sport originated in the United States and is now winning fans here in Hebei, central China.
特别的上瘾，每一次下班就是也不去吃饭。
I'm completely hooked. I skip dinner after work because eating feels like a waste of time. I play at least 4 to 5 times a week.
我感觉我身边的朋友都会打皮克球，在鹤壁打皮克球场地是不要钱的。
Pretty much all my friends play pickleball. The courts in Hebei are free to use, so we save a ton of money.
Pickleball first arrived in China through the country's southeastern coast, but it was Hebei, the smallest prefecture-level city in central China's Henan province, that moved the fastest. Today, the city has around 300,000 regular pickleball players. That means roughly 1 in every 5 residents play the sport at least once a week. And across the city, nearly 1,600 courts have already been built.
It's 9 p.m. and the courts are packed. The city has built what it called a 15-minute fitness circle. Residents can find a pickleball court within walking distance of their homes.
But Hebei's ambitions go far beyond the recreation. Inside this factory, workers are producing thousands of pickleball paddles and balls every day, many destined for overseas markets. China already manufactures more than 85% of the world's pickleball equipment, and companies in Hebei are trying to carve out a bigger share of that growing industry. Local brand Gaili Sports only entered the pickleball business in 2024, but it has already launched high-end carbon fiber paddles and expanded exports to the United States, Europe, and Southeast Asia.
皮克球这个运动呢，目前在美国
There are around 45 million pickleball players in the United States, while China currently has only several million. So, the market potential here is enormous.
The company is also investing in smart technology, developing paddles equipped with sensors that can track shot strength and ball placement through a mobile app. And Hebi's not only making equipment, it's also turning itself into a national competition hub. The city hosts China's National Pickleball Championships for 3 consecutive years, from 2024 through 2026, drawing professional players and amateur enthusiasts from across the world. At the city's main sports venue, this official says the tournaments have helped boost tourism, restaurants, and local businesses, while putting Hebi on the national map.
赛事期间 During the tournament, Hebi's tourist arrivals rose 395% above daily averages, and tourism revenue increased 380%, turning event traffic into consumption gains.
And perhaps most importantly, Hebi is preparing for the sport's future. Pickleball is seen as a strong contender for inclusion in the 2032 Olympic Games. Sensing that opportunity early, the city has already integrated the sport into middle school physical education exams and launched youth training programs. For Hebi, pickleball is part of its urban identity. It's becoming a way to drive manufacturing, attract tourism, encourage fitness, and give the small inland city a chance to stand out on a much larger stage. Li Shuang, CGTN, Hebi, Henan Province.
For more insights into China-U.S. relations, we're now joined once again by Mr. Liu Baocheng, Dean of Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics, and Professor Zhang Gong, Professor of Economics at the same university. Welcome to our special coverage, gentlemen. We earlier talked about the concept of building a constructive China-U.S. relations on the strategic stability. And President Xi actually defined that concept, or broke down that concept into 4 aspects: cooperation as the mainstay, competition within limits, and differences kept manageable, and peace mode more predictable. Do you think China and US are going to achieve all that simultaneously, or we'll start with something easy? Mr. Liu.
Well, these are not really abstract concepts anymore, but they set up the principles that can really guide the framework setting and also the roadmap setting for more of the later actions that they're yet to come. But these are really a very comprehensive approach that offers such a level of guidance for more of the ministries and agencies to really work out more specifics. And it is really a very timely fashion, because when the U.S. and China's relationship has been, veering into a lot more of uncertainty, and now to set up the tone, to also carve out the boundaries, and also to make sure that we are able to move ahead, with managed competition, and hence to contribute to peace and prosperity is something that is crucially important. So therefore, much is really dependent on specific action items and also institutional setting for continued dialogue, continued engagement, to prevent a zero-sum mentality, and also to prevent a strategic trap that people might, worry to fall into.
Right, a giant ship, as how President Xi described it, the giant ship on the turbulent water that needs steering.
Yes.
Yeah, Professor Gong, it will almost certainly take some time for people from around the world to really get to know this new term, for it to sink in with people watching China-U.S. ties. And they might be asking, Is this something completely new? Is it a continuation of the major country relations that they're more familiar with? What is new here? How do you understand this definition?
Well, I think for a long time there hasn't been a consensus between the two sides with respect to the nature of this bilateral relationship. The American side used to talk about 3 Cs, China used to talk about major power relationship. Now we have a consensus. The two presidents agree that the nature of their bilateral relationship is characterized by these 4 strategic stabilities, and in concrete terms as defined by President Xi himself. So I think from now on it's more of a matter of implementations. I've been emphasizing a couple of times in the past few days about Washington, in the White House, the cabinet members need to stick to the tone and the principle and the spirit reached by the two presidents. And I think once this thing being fully implemented, this momentum can go on to the extent that many more countries come to realize that indeed this is a stable relationship with many certainties, and then they can work with two countries. I think the entire global politics is anchored on this very important bilateral relationship between these two countries. Once that is stabilized with certainties, I think there's going to be more peace and prosperity around the world.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. And that's all we have for the latest updates on both the US President Donald Trump's visit to China and also other updates around the world. I'm Li Dongling in Beijing.
I'm Zhong Shidu. Stay with us here. We'll have more coming up at the top of the next hour.
Until then, you're watching CGTN. We're going to bring the latest China-US relations and also the visit made by Donald Trump to China. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing.
I'm Zheng Shi. Thanks so much for joining us this hour.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has held a small group meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Beijing, and the meeting came a day after Xi held talks with Trump, who is on a state visit to China from May the 13th to the 15th. Noting that Trump's visit was a historic and landmark one, President Xi said the two sides have set the new vision of building a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability. President Xi said they have reached important common understandings on maintaining stable economic and trade ties, expanding practical cooperation in various fields, and properly addressing each other's concerns. The two sides also agreed to strengthen communication and coordination on international and regional issues. The visit is conducive to enhancing mutual understanding, deepening mutual trust, and improving the well-being of the two peoples.
And we do understand U.S. President Donald Trump is about to conclude his state visit to China and depart Beijing. We're waiting for pictures coming in, and we'll bring that to you when they become available.
Right, and it's the last day of U.S. President Donald Trump's state visit to China, of course. And for the latest, our reporter Zhao Yunfei is joining us in Beijing. So, Yunfei, what have you for us right now?
Hi there, Dongning and Zheng Shi. I'm here at Beijing Capital International Airport, and you can see behind me is the Air Force One. We're expecting the arrival of President Trump to the airport. Now, this is the very last part of the agenda for President Trump's state visit to China, and over here, we can see people gathering, trying to give the last part of the welcome, as well as seeing him off from the airport. We can see the military band. We can also see the honor guard. We can also see the group of students, the younger generation, waving flags of China flag as well as the U.S. flag. They are the group of people that signaling the future people-to-people ties. When it comes to people bond between the two countries, both the leaders emphasizing that, especially at the banquet last night when President Xi mentioned about the ping-pong diplomacy, while President Trump mentioned about the Chinese workers working at the East Coast. Both of the story tracing back to history, and both sides would like to last this kind of history. Now, one of the best outcomes for this visit is that the two countries are trying to positioning their ties as constructive strategic stability. Analysts believe that the word stability is very important, as the two sides have a stable relationship will better promote the stability of the world. And this is another step forward for the two countries to establish their ties, further carry on their relationship based on the spirit of mutual respect, mutual understanding, and win-win. As what President Xi told President Trump at the bilateral meeting, that he hopes that 2026 will be a historic landmark year that opens a new chapter for bilateral ties. Now back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Yunfei, for the latest updates of what's going on here. And let's get to our studio guest today, Mike Walter, traveling all the way from the United States to here to report on this matter, and has been closely following the latest developments indeed. And Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and also has been following the whole matter closely and providing to us all of his insights. I'll start with you, Mike. Your observations these days.
I thought you were going to ask which one has worse sleep deprivation, jet lag, me or President Trump. But
right.
And I think he's actually doing better than I am. But I have to say that I think this is a welcome chapter, not just in U.S.-China relations, but I think globally. I think, the one thing that I said the other night when I was on the air here with your colleagues is that, in New York, where Wall Street is, in Washington, people want stability, and they tend to sense that there's a lot of chaos. And so seeing these two major powers coming together talking about strategic cooperation. I think this is a welcome sign, and I think, and I think President Trump really needed this because all the economic arrows were pointing down. I mean, gas prices are going up. In terms of consumer confidence, it's shaken.
Midterm elections approaching.
Midterm elections just around the corner. So I think this is a big boost for him, and I think, he's walking away with a win. He's on the world stage. It went really well for both sides, I think, and I think the world's going to welcome the message coming out of this.
And the big business delegation is going to take something away with them.
Well, and the point there, I mean, I had the opportunity a couple years ago to come here and do this documentary series, Race to the Future, where, I mean, I hadn't been back since COVID. And it's mind-blowing. I mean, you're seeing AI, you're seeing robotics, you're seeing these plants humming. And I think it's not lost on President Trump. A lot of world leaders have been coming to China and visiting with President Xi, and there's been deals. And, I think these American businesses don't want to get locked out. And the thought of, okay, well, we can move our plants somewhere else, but can you get that kind of effective work done somewhere else? Absolutely not. China's state of the art. And so I think the fact that you saw all these business leaders coming along with them, I think the message is pretty clear. It's not just, President Trump. It's the Silicon Valley. This is an integration that's worked for many, many years. And I think what we've seen over the last few years is not good for either country. And so I think that, again, I think it's a really positive sign.
Mike, let me follow up on that. Donald Trump is wrapping up a whirlwind of a trip to China spanning 3 days. We're still waiting to hear an official readout of what deals or agreements have been struck this time. But what do you think has been accomplished from Donald Trump's side of things?
I think any kind of deal right now for him is a plus. I mean, as I said, economically, things don't look so great. In terms of his dealings with other countries, they've not been going very well. But I think one of the things that I talked about the other night is I think there's a lot of areas where the two sides can work together and actually forge ahead. And I think one area in particular is healthcare. I think that pharmaceutical companies. I was just talking to a doctor in Southern California, and he was and they're actually coming to China, this organization, soon. And he said, who cares if it's Chinese manufacturer or a pharmaceutical company in the United States? If they've got a cure for your wife or your kids, you don't care. And so I think there's areas where there can actually be a lot of work done together. Climate change in the past was always an area. I think, Trump has his own views about EVs and all of this sort of thing, which kind of vary from the previous administration, Biden or Obama. But I do think there's areas where they can carve out and move ahead and forge new territory, new ground.
Right. And John, actually, we've been trying to interpret the concept, the very essence concept of strategic stability in terms of building a constructive China-US relationship. We interpret the whole principles and possible implementations, but what does it exactly mean for every one of us in China, every one of them in the US, for instance, and everyone in the world, basically? What does it mean to our daily life?
I think at a very fundamental level, it's all about cooperation. I think President Xi talks about a new chapter being opened. And I think this is a great opportunity for American people to have a better understanding of China. For a long time, China's image in the United States have been sort of bare-mouthed, even vilified by some Western medias. And I think this time, with hours and hours of live coverage by stations like Fox News, right, by CNN, a lot of American people start to realize that, China is very, very different from in their mind, the image in their mind. And I think they probably, after watching this whole event, they start to really support President Trump's vision about his China policy. It's such a good thing to go to China and to establish this relationship, this cooperative relationship. And I think this winning idea for President Trump goes well beyond just some more beans and beef and Boeing planes. I think it's more about this very fundamental level, it's philosophical value that it's a better relationship. It's in the national interest of American people, for American businesses, American people. In a small business, big business, there's huge opportunities here in China, right? So I think from that perspective, it's definitely a win for President Trump.
Right, and talking about the White House reporters pool, actually, for many of them, it's their first time in China. Unlike you, Mike, you're already familiar with China. What message do you think the media people will bring back to the U.S.?
Yeah, I want to just kind of, I compliment your point because it's a really good one. One of the things that we see in the United States, and the late President Jimmy Carter, I had the opportunity of interviewing him in Atlanta many years ago, and he said, you know, people run for president of the United States, they run against China because Chinese voters can't vote for American presidents. So they vilify China, I'm going to be tough on China, blah, 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 blah. But he said once they get in the White House, they pivot. They recognize that they have to work with China. Donald Trump kind of blew up that playbook. I mean, he came here, as we know, in 2017. He hosted President Xi at Mar-a-Lago. We had these strategic and economic dialogues going on in the previous administration. He blew those up. And suddenly the relationship went south. So if there was ever going to be a president who was going to come here and say, hey, let's knit things back together again, this is fantastic, and have people back in the United States say, yeah, China's not so bad. This is actually good, to your point, I think, because it's something, you know, because you have kind of this audience, this Fox News audience, that views things through a certain lens. And to see China in a different light today, as they have over the last couple of days, I think it's a good thing.
I like about this new concept, this new vision that's come up this time, constructive relationship of strategic position. I mean, how would you interpret it? Because I think people get the gist of it. I mean, stability, differences will remain, frictions might come up, but we will aim for that strategic stability as the two nations move forward. But how would you interpret it and bring that concept to your viewers? I believe it will take time for that to sink in with people watching this.
Yeah, I think that there's obvious areas where there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be obvious areas where there won't be cooperation, there'll be competition. I think those were there before. But I think it's just talking about, you know, a stable playing field where each side kind of tries to cooperate with one another. Where there's going to be differences, there's going to be differences. But I think this concept, you know, like I was talking about the strategic economic dialogues, I can remember the Chinese delegations coming in and talking to them, and I always thought it was funny because one of them said, when Wang Yi's sitting there with John Kerry or whoever, that's one thing. But we're on the economic side. Everybody loves trade and working together. He goes, we don't really have that many problems. Well, now we have had for the last few years. So I think kind of those are obvious threads where you can start to patch things back together again. And I think trade, business, I think the fact that we saw these major tech titans from the Silicon Valley coming on this trip, I think those are all good signals. And I think it was actually choreographed rather nicely by the White House in that respect.
And I also add that in addition to the institutional mechanisms in place for resolving things, discuss things, the personal level communication between the two presidents is also very important, adds another layer of protection to this mechanism. I'm just going to quote what President Trump said during his opening remark yesterday. He said, I would call you, you would call me, or for things that we want to discuss, right? So I think from that perspective, this is a very good relationship at a personal level even.
Communication channel does matter, and they have been talking about making better use of political and diplomatic and also even military communication channels. They have been open, but on and off. How to keep it open, John? How to keep it open after the leaders' meeting?
I think we have these dialogues and also channels of communication to be institutionalized for the long run. These are the things going to be, regularly being held between the two sides. If things doesn't work out, have to escalate to the two presidents. They're going to call each other, I guess, as President Trump said.
And writing letters.
So I think, the point is institutionalization. I mean, you have to be put in place and to be implemented. And both sides need to come to those meetings in earnest, with sincerity. I think that's very important.
If I could just mention, during his first administration, I remember talking to a source who said that Donald Trump wanted to just call Xi Jinping. It was a Tuesday, wanted to call him Thursday night at 8 p.m. And this person had to kind of explain to him, that's not how things work. He's going to want his people to sit there and brief him. Any world leader's going to spend some time trying to think how they're going to have this phone call. People don't just pick up the phone and call on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night. But I think he still has that kind of mentality. He's got a different approach. I mean, we saw that in the speeches as well. President Xi kind of laying everything out. You hear Trump saying, this is remarkable, this is great. But that's, I think, what people like about him in the United States.
Things might have changed. Things might have changed since this meeting.
In what way?
He may pick up the phone.
Changing what
Maybe
way?
it's President Xi calling him now. I don't know.
Well, keep the phone call open is, after all, a very good thing.
Again, we've been talking about head of state diplomacy for years now, and I think, again, we're seeing it play out very well in Beijing this time. Donald Trump has invited President Xi on a trip to the United States later this year. John, do you think that sets a tone for the remainder of Donald Trump's term in the White House?
Oh, I think this is a huge, huge move. I think President Trump going to Washington is a state visit, facing an audience that used to be quite hostile towards China, right? I mean, look at the Congress, look at the Senate. Now we're talking about a official state visit. Remember last time President Xi went to the United States, he didn't go to Washington. He actually went to Florida, right? He went to Mar-a-Lago. But now this is a state visit to the White House, to Washington. And I think it's going to be totally different. These senators and Congress have to sit down in the seats and listen to President Trump talking about things.
Right, and this trip made by Donald Trump actually is very short, but very packed with a lot of discussions. The big discussions, that's what he described it yesterday, and also small group discussions, a more private one this morning. How do you think the discussions, Mike, how do you think the discussions can really help in terms of building constructive relations?
Well, it's interesting. I think any other administration, you would say, I'm going to sit down and talk to the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense or Chief of Staff, and we can actually find some kind of common ground or whatever. You hear in Washington all the time that there's only one person to talk to in the White House, and that's Donald Trump. And so I think this personal quality that you're talking about, the connection. I was at an event last year, and former Vice President Mike Pence talked about, the tensions, but he also talked about this personal relationship, that they have chemistry. And I think Trump talks about it all the time. I think he genuinely likes President Xi Jinping. And there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, the one-on-one, sitting down, kind of hashing out things, I think, it's a real positive event. And the other thing, to John's point, if you have a kind of a hostile audience towards China and President Xi Jinping, well, that hostile audience is going to erode over time if he's coming here and saying, I love this guy, I'm having a great time, China's okay. Because you've got an audience that generally goes in that direction. And to your point, you see, Congress basically lockstep with President Trump. Whatever President Trump says, they're going in that direction. If President Trump says China's where it's at, you're going to see a lot of Republicans now pivoting in that direction.
We've been playing pictures from earlier today when the two presidents engaged in that smaller scale meeting between two sides with more restricted and limited personnel from both sides. John, your take on what that smaller scale meeting could have accomplished? It's a more informal setting for sure compared to how events unfolded yesterday.
I would imagine you would be talking about things of extreme importance to both countries. These may not be sort of big, large items, but important issues. It's a more of a personal setting, I would say, right? And less sort of protocol, less formality. And I think in this kind of atmosphere, it's very conducive to have a very sincere, very candid
John,
conversation.
Sorry to cut you off. Looks like we're getting visuals of the president's motorcade pulling up at the Beijing Capital International Airport. Donald Trump wrapping up a 3-day state visit to China after a very packed schedule in the Chinese capital.
Right, and you're now watching the live picture from Beijing Capital International Airport, where President Donald Trump is expected to leave China after his official state visit. And this is basically the final scene of a 3-day visit indeed. It began with a very formal welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People, continued with talks, broad-scale discussions and also small group discussions as well in these 2 days, and a visit to the Temple of Heaven as well, a state banquet. So a lot has been achieved during the visit.
A packed schedule indeed. Just today, the two presidents participated in a tea reception followed by a smaller scale meeting with more restricted personnel from both sides.
And President Donald Trump's motorcade has arrived at Beijing Capital International Airport, and he's stepping out of his vehicle, ready to board Air Force One to come back home. I think he's taking away a lot from this visit.
That's right, and it looks like a send-off ceremony is ready. President Donald Trump there at the Beijing Capital International Airport, ready to head back home after a very packed 3 days here in China.
And he's going to be... He was warmly welcomed by the Great Hall of the People, and now Chinese officials are going to officially see him off at the Beijing Capital International Airport.
We do want to take this opportunity to recap some of the most important moments on this trip between the two presidents. During their talks at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing on Thursday, President Xi reiterated China's commitment to the stable, healthy, and sustainable development of China-U.S. relations.
Right, and we see Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the airport seeing President Donald Trump off. As China's foreign minister, he has been closely involved in this diplomatic handling of this visit. He attended main talks and also the state banquet last night, and now he's here for the final send-off. That gives the departure of a very clear diplomatic closing. The message is continuity. The leaders set the direction, and the foreign policy teams and also other teams from both the business and the industrial sectors, technology sectors, will carry their work forward.
And sending off President Trump alongside Foreign Minister Wang is Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Xie Feng.
I think they exchanged words a little bit between President Trump and Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
I mean, all of them were at that state banquet yesterday. I'm sure they had plenty of time to talk about matters that concerned both countries and, frankly, the whole world.
Donald Trump is going to board Air Force One, going back home, and I think after the ending of this very significant meeting between the two heads of state, next stage is quite important. A summit is not judged only by the handshakes, meetings, discussions in Beijing. It's judged by what happens after the aircraft leaves. Whether officials, it is judged by whether officials meet again, whether business confidence improves, and whether channels still stay open, as we just earlier discussed, and whether both sides can turn broad principles into daily work and implementations.
And if you're just joining us here on CGTN, you're looking at pictures of visiting U.S. President Donald Trump bidding farewell to Beijing. President Trump said his meeting with President Xi is an important one that has drawn global attention, and that he is willing to work with President Xi to strengthen communication and cooperation, properly manage differences, open up the best U.S.-China relationship in history, and create an even stronger relationship going forward.
Indeed, for the cameras, this marks the end of the visit as the door of the Air Force One closed. For diplomats, it marks the beginning of the implementation. The follow-ups are just beginning. The leaders have set the tone, apparently, and you're seeing this visit, all the events happened during these days are closely watched by media from various countries because it matters to almost basically everybody in the world. And the teams now have to do the work as follow-ups, and that means regular communication, clear rules for business, continued dialogue on trade and technology, and careful handling of sensitive issues as well. And strategic stability, which is the essence of the consensus reached by the two heads of states, is not created by just one meeting. It is built by repeated contact, predictable behavior, and the ability to keep talking even when the issues are difficult. And we're expecting to see Air Force One moving on the runway as President Donald Trump leaves Beijing. And this visit indeed leaves behind a very clear reporting line that China and the United States are trying to build a more constructive and strategically stable relationship.
Our colleague, CGTN American anchor Mike Walter, is watching all of this with us here in our Beijing studio. Mike, Donald Trump is walking away with new consensus with his Chinese counterpart, possibly new deals. We're still waiting to find out what those deals are. What else do you think he's walking away with?
I think he's walking away with a PR victory. It's interesting. We're talking about, the framing of this, what the framework is. And I think these summits, a framework emerges each time. I'm reminded of the summit in 2013 in Southern California. And they called it shirt sleeve diplomacy. It was Barack Obama and President Xi. But, we talked about this informal gathering today. They're very important. I remember the two of them went and sat on this bench. It was the friendship bench. He gifted that to President Xi. What came out of that was the new model of major power relations. And so I think we're seeing another new model today.
We're also seeing the door of Air Force One has been closed. And that signals that President Donald Trump's state visit to China this time has officially concluded. As what you said, Mike, the lasting significance will not be measured only by the events we have seen in Beijing. It will be measured by all the follow-ups, what Donald Trump is going to bring back to Beijing, and perhaps all those communication channels, the joint efforts will have a lasting value to the bilateral relationship, indeed.
Well, I mentioned shirt sleeve diplomacy. We're going to see the shirt sleeve work now. I mean, all the people that work under them trying to implement something to come away with some, the fact that they sat down and talked, but now you've got to, as you said, implement. And that's going to take a lot of hard work on the part of the people on the lower levels.
Right.
But clearly, they've been given a signal. Let's get it done. So I think it's a positive step forward. Again, as you pointed out, we don't really have the readout on exactly what was agreed to. That may come in a short amount of time or a little bit longer. But I don't suspect that Donald Trump's leaving here empty-handed. I think, as I said, it's a PR win, whatever comes out of this. And I think coming into this, I had talked to a lot of people in New York and Washington, and really, it's hard for them to say they're optimistic. They cautiously optimistic. But right now, a small deal, any kind of deal, is much better than tariffs and tensions and kind of this back and forth that we've seen in recent years. So I think it's definitely a plus.
President Donald Trump is, of course, not leaving empty-handedly. What he has left in Beijing then?
Well, I think he left Beijing with more than just a basket of deals, I would say. I think he left the country with a reorientation of the relationship. I think this is actually very important. Both sides agree with the kind of relationship we're going to have, and this metaphor of a giant ship, right, steered essentially jointly, right, by President Xi and President Trump. I mean, this is the implied message from President Xi's message speaking. I think this is probably worth more than just some sales of American products to China. Another thing I want to emphasize is that historically, American presidents visited China. They usually go to before visiting China or after visiting China, they go to Japan or South Korea and these places. But this time, this airplane we are seeing is flying right back to Washington, right? And he flew in here right from Washington. And this is how many hours of trip? 13, 14 hours of trip?
It's a long flight.
It's a long flight, yeah. So, but I'm trying to find out.
Although he's on Air Force One, which is more comfortable, still a long flight.
But he can sleep on there.
The point I'm trying to point out is that, of course, they stop over in Japan, South Korea, not just for a stopover for sleeping, I guess. And the point is that this is a direct flight to China. He came here, only for China. So I think this is a important message, how important it is the two countries' relationship. So I would.
And Donald Trump actually was very excited on the way here. He basically sent a comment saying during the flight, "I'm on my way to China."
Yeah, he's excited. Yeah.
During the trip, I think I'm doubting if he has enough sleep or not.
He has been had a tough time, leading up to this trip, right? This problem in Iran and the U.S. domestic politics. I mean, President Trump is probably more welcome in this town than back home in Washington. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. He's very, very welcome
I think
here.
Chinese people are curious of what he's going to bring to China, indeed.
Yeah. And I think clearly he was impressed with a number of things here in Beijing. The children welcoming him, both at the airport and at the Great Hall of the People. The welcome he was able to get from the Chinese president, his counterpart, and also the Temple of Heaven, which he called incredible. He said China is beautiful. It's clear he has been impressed by a number of things on this trip.
And to your point, I think this is a president that's very clear about perceptions and setting agendas. And that is a clear message. I'm going to China and I'm coming right back home. I'm not stopping in Vietnam or some other country. It's not going to be a 2 or 3 country, sojourn. It's there and back. So that in itself was a signal. This is going to be a very important trip. I'm going there.
And very concentrated as well.
And also the delegation he brought along with him, the heavy hitters, big names.
As we are seeing at the Beijing Capital International Airport, the image of Air Force One taxiing at the runway. That officially means that President Donald Trump is leaving Beijing after this short but very packed, very I think it's fair to say it's a very successful visit, right?
Yes, I think so, indeed.
And what he leaves behind to the teams in both countries is the follow-up as to how to carry forward the consensus reached by the two heads of states to build a constructive China-US relationship with strategic stability and how to implement on the ground, indeed.
And one has to assume that he will take it to social media to reflect on this trip to China, and we will be hearing from him very shortly on what he thinks is the biggest achievement on this trip to China.
He can post during the flight.
Absolutely he can. Absolutely he can.
And anybody who's been on a flight with him, he doesn't sleep. So he probably either that or he's talking to reporters. So we're going to hear a lot about this.
We can wait to see more of his posts on Truth Social, maybe along the way, not wait until he lands. Well, one very important issue between any relations between two giant powers like China and the US is mutual trust. Do you think he has achieved, President Donald Trump has achieved building trust during his visit this time, Mike?
That may be a little bit more difficult. I did a lot of man-on-the-street interviews yesterday with tourists visiting China, and so many of them were like, I don't know, Trump could agree to something and then change his mind 3 days later. That seems to be kind of what we hear a lot. But I think that, again, it gets back to what John was mentioning, this dynamic, this chemistry between these two leaders. I think that's how you build it. I mean, it's funny because this is what clearly a big part of U.S.-China relations. It's people-to-people relations. And those two connecting.
Like the pickleball story.
Yeah, it's the pickleball story all over again. It's the ability to pick up the phone and have that phone call. That's important.
Yeah, and also they're going to meet again 3 times for the rest of the year, right? So with more times of meeting between these
invitations
two great leaders,
has been sent.
I don't think there's a
the G20, APEC,
state visit.
State visit. Yeah, they'll be seeing a lot.
President Donald Trump has officially left Beijing Capital International Airport and heading back home with, like what Mike said, not empty-handed, and like John said, has left something to China as well, to bilateral relations. I think in a positive way, very positive way.
Very, very positive.
All right.
And let's do check-in with CGTN reporter Zhao Yunfei, who's standing by at the airport here in Beijing. Yunfei, what more can you share with us?
Well, Zhongshi and Dongning, now Air Force One has just left the area behind me. Now, in my eyesight, I can see Air Force One is still taxiing and is about to take off here at Beijing Capital International Airport. marking the end of the 3-day state visit by U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, I can still hear a lot of people are cheering because there are staff from both the Chinese side and the American side. Some of them are taking photos before the Air Force One really disappeared in the skyline, and that is because a lot of people over here are really thinking about this event, a very landmark one. This is the first visit by President Trump since he returned to the White House for the second time, and also first a visit by a U.S. president to China in almost 9 years. See the significance of it. Seeing President Trump off at the airport is Wang Yi, Chinese foreign minister, also a member of the political bureau of CPC Central Committee. Remember the day before yesterday, the person at the airport welcoming him was the Chinese Vice President Han Zheng. So certainly China has attaches great importance to this visit. So does President Trump's team. Alongside the delegation, he has Pete Hegseth, he has Marco Rubio. He also has a large delegation of business elites from across sectors. On bilateral ties, the two leaders, President Xi and President Trump, had a range of discussion on Thursday, ranging from trade to agriculture, from law enforcement to military channel communication. And this is communication, really strategic communication across various areas. Of course, analysts say that the two presidents also got the chance to meet in the future, but this meeting specifically lay a foundation, especially when it comes to both two countries agreed upon of further developing and fostering in their relationship of constructive strategic stability manner. Now back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Yunfei, reporting from Beijing Capital International Airport. President Donald Trump has just left the airport. The Air Force One has just left, and President Donald Trump has officially concluded his trip to China. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has held a private meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Beijing. The meeting came a day after Xi held talks with Trump, who is on a state visit to China from May the 13th to the 15th. Noting that Trump's visit was a historic and landmark one, President Xi said the two sides have set the new vision of building a constructive China-U.S. relationship with strategic stability. President Xi said they have reached important common understandings on maintaining stable economic and trade ties, expanding practical cooperation in various fields, and properly addressing each other's concerns. And the two sides also agreed to strengthen communication and coordination on international and regional issues. And the visit is conducive to enhancing mutual understanding, deepen mutual trust, and improving the well-being of the two peoples.
And U.S. President Donald Trump says his trip to China has been extraordinarily successful, globally watched, and unforgettable. He stands ready to maintain sincere and in-depth communication with President Xi and looks forward to hosting him in Washington, D.C.
All right, now let's get back to our studio guests. Well, John, still about the small scope or a small group discussions between the two heads of states, because I think in a more private manner, they probably will discuss bigger things that matter more to the whole world. How do you think that small-scale talk will influence the larger-scale world?
Well, we don't know what they actually talk about,
right.
But I can speculate. You're talking about things of a global scale, global implications, and I can imagine, things related to the conflict in the Middle East, to Taiwan, for example. These are very, in addition to these are much more important issues. I would say these are also quite sensitive issues, preserved for discussion of more cozy setting. And I think the bottom line is that these two people really like each other. They have a lot of chemistry among them. And I think at the end of the day, if any difficulties, any hurdles between the two countries, it can always escalate to their level and work out something, right? So I think, this is a very successful trip using President Trump's own word, extraordinarily successful.
With very big discussions,
Yeah, so I think it's going very well. And also I want to point out one thing, before President Trump boarded the airplane, he had this, not so small chat with Prime Minister Wang Yi. It's actually a fairly long chat in my view, right? And also look at the body language, it seems to be, pretty close to each other. And they're probably talking something important, I guess.
Should be very important.
I'll just make one other observation about that conversation. I think when you look at the Foreign Minister Wang Yi and you look at President Xi Jinping, I think there's some practicing with the handshakes before Trump gets here, because his handshake goes on for about 5 hours, but they were in there the whole way. I noticed they didn't.
And Foreign Minister Wang Yi actually gave him the last round of handshakes, seeing him off at the Beijing Capital International Airport. What's your observation about his leaving? I mean, President Donald Trump officially concluded the trip.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I mean, that wasn't just a casual, hey, thanks for having me here. I mean, they did have what seemed like a lengthy conversation. But I think John makes an important point. When you look at the situation with Iran and some of these other hotspots, the war in Ukraine, I think that there's going to be differences between these two leaders. But I think the fact that maybe, having conversations, one might be able to persuade the other one to make different moves, which I think would be good. And I think that one of the things I will say about President Trump is I think he's open to listening to somebody of Xi Jinping's stature. And so perhaps it is better for the world that the two of them sat down and had this nice private conversation. We don't know what the outcome's going to be long term, but you never know.
Yeah, but at least for 3 years and beyond, because it's clearly stated in President Xi Jinping's statement that this constructive relation between the two countries with strategic stability should work for 3 years and beyond.
Yeah, and it brings new vitality and energy, I think, to the relationship between these two countries. And they've been kind of going in opposite directions, so it's nice to see them both come back together again. I joked recently that I came to CGTN during the golden era of U.S.-China relations. But I think we can get back there again, and I think both sides actually want that. I think the people in China and the people in the United States definitely want that.
Right. Yeah, gentlemen, I do believe we still have a little bit more time left in this conversation. John, I do want to pick your brain a little bit about the deliverables this time. I mean, the broad representation that Donald Trump brought with him in that business delegation gives us some clues about the types of deals that might have been inked this time. Your expectations there, your predictions there?
I've seen some reports or some mentioning of definitely the remaining 10% fentanyl tariff gone. I've been talking about this a couple of times for quite some time, that this should be gone. This is irrelevant at this point, right? Certainly, China really likes and loves to help America with battling this, this vicious problem, and I think we're genuinely trying to help. But for something just like this, and we have done a lot about this issue. This 10% tariff related to fentanyl is not justified at this point. So I think I'm very happy to say I'm very, very confident, even though it hasn't been officially announced yet. I think I'm very confident that 10% thing is going to be gone. Another thing I would say, the purchases, right? I would expect that there will be big purchases, airplanes, for example, definitely. And other agricultural products. I think that's a win for America. So what's for China? And the third thing I would speculate is with respect to the export control from American side, high-tech export control from American side. I think there's a reason that Jason Huang jumped onto the airplane at the last minute. He's not going to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would imagine that H200 chips going to be widely available in China. We're going to buy a fair amount of that. I don't know what's the stock price for NVIDIA tomorrow morning when the market opens in the United States.
Well, stock price is rising.
He's giving stock tips now.
I know. I'll stick to your prediction of ripping off the 10% tariff. I will remember that and to see if that is happening. Right. And that's a matter of a meal between us. As what you said, NVIDIA's Huang jumped on the plane at the last minute, and Apple's Cook, they both cite very rapid innovation and adoption of technology in China, showing very obvious interest in cooperation with China in that regard. And more top executives, along with the delegation from high-tech and finance sectors, more of them actually joining the delegation than the one in 2017. So China is going to buy a lot of stuff from them and going to accept their investment. How is China going to benefit? Mike?
Boy, that's a good question. I think you benefit anytime there's trade back and forth, because there's benefits to both sides. I will say what John mentioned. That I think the tech executives coming here. That's obviously it's a signal. But I think there's another area that Trump's very interested in that I don't think is getting a lot of play, which is his basically heartland of the United States. That he owns that. That's a very red part of the U.S. And, I was at an event in Chicago last year, and they're suffering. I mean, soybean farmers are not able. They worked for decades creating these relationships in China, and then all of a sudden there's these impediments.
Right.
And they looked at the first Trump administration. He bailed them out, and they're like, well, we're hoping maybe that happens a second time. They'd much rather trade. They'd much rather send their soybeans to China. So I think these are some of the things that people really aren't talking about. They're talking about planes. They're talking about rare earth. But I think he also is concerned about his own base, because, you lose that's a problem. And you mentioned earlier, the midterms are coming up, and there's a lot of suggestions that it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans. If he can send something to middle America and say, hey, I got you something in China, I think that's a win for him. It's a win for his party.
John, your last words, very short last words, how China is going to get reciprocal benefits.
Well, there's some speculation that China is going to get some relaxation about Chinese investment in the United States. President Trump is actually quite open. Report is quite open to the idea of a joint venture, for example, in the automobile industry, with Chinese companies going to America to make an investment. And I think if that part is going to be addressed in the coming announcement, I think it's a huge win for China as well.
Right. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Mike Walter, traveling all the way from the States to cover this event, and Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you very much for your insights, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And that concludes our special coverage on President Donald Trump's trip to China, and he officially concludes his trip and left the Beijing Capital International Airport today. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing.
I'm Zhou Shi. Thank you so much for watching. This is CGTN.